Hey everyone, my name is Ashton Gleckman and welcome back to Behind the Score, the series on YouTube where we analyze film music, a lot of our favorite film scores from Interstellar, The Dark Knight, and today we're diving into one of my favorite all-time scores, and that is It, composed by Benjamin Wallfisch. Now this is a super unique score that combines so many things I love, really cool sound design elements, really beautiful, elegant string writing, and arrangements done by Ben Wallfisch that really harken back to his scores for A Cure for Wellness and Lights Out, and really bring all of his influences together. We're going to be diving into cues like 27 Years, Every 27 Years, Derry, Beverly, Georgie's Theme, Kiss, and many more, and just taking a look at the orchestration, the harmony, and the different musical elements that comprise all of those cues. One of the things that makes It so great on a movie level and also on a book level is the way that it combines two elements. It is a genre film, it is a horror film, but at the same time, it's a horror film that really does have a heart. So we're following these characters, they're growing up, they're all facing their own struggles, but it's their outsiderness that they all have together that allows them to come together and defeat this entity called It, which is played just brilliantly by Bill Skarsgård. So as usual, you guys can download the MIDI file for free if you guys want to import that into your DAW and follow along. And with all that being said, happy Halloween, and I look forward to diving into the musical world of It. So thank you, here's the suite, and see you afterwards.
We'll be after you guys too now.
Oh, no, Bowers? He's always after us.
I guess that's one thing we all have in common.
Yeah, home school. Welcome to the Losers Club.
It is a really unique story, and I think the thing that makes it so great is that, like other Stephen King books, whether it's Pet Sematary, Misery, Under the Dome is one of my favorites, and all of his short stories, whether it's 1408, even though the stories are big and there's a really big event happening, the characters are always at the forefront, and the character development is always really at the core of the story. So in this film in specific, we have characters like Richie and Mike and Beverly, and they're all so well developed, and they all have their own struggles that they're all facing. But the thing that they all have in common is this, struggle for defeating the entity of Pennywise. And they all come together through that struggle, and that's what allows them to persevere. So one of the things that I love about Stephen King and the way that he writes is, even though his words are so descriptive and he's able to really dive into every aspect of the story, he leaves a lot open for interpretation in regards to adaptions. So TV adaptions and film adaptions. So if you look at a lot of the great Stephen King adaptions, whether it's, The Mist or 1408 or other films like that, the directors have really taken it upon themselves to expand on the story and really just give it its own unique style and flair. So these two films were directed by Andy Muschietti, and they were produced by his sister, Barbara Muschietti. And the thing that's so great about them is it really captures the tone of the book. Like, every Stephen King book has its own tone, like its unique tone. Pet Sematary is very depressing, like very subdued, and especially near the end it gets super, super rough. But they all have their own feel. And the thing that Andy did so well is really chose to focus on the kids and really chose to focus on their development as characters. And the reason I mention all that is because when it comes to the music, Ben Wallfisch chooses to really accent all of those heartbeats super, super well. So, even though it's a huge story, he chooses to have this really tight core, which is the Losers Club and cues like Beverly and Kiss and Blood Oath and stuff like that.
So can you talk a little bit about that sort of initial conversation with Andy when he first sort of described his vision for the film? Like, were you already familiar with the novel, and what was the first musical material that you actually wrote for it?
Well, I read the book soon after it came out and was terrified and sort of put it away. And then I was really into Stephen King, Misery and Pet Sematary. I mean, a bunch of books I love. And Andy is just one of those filmmakers that instantly makes you feel comfortable. And we kind of geeked out for a long time just about our shared love of John Williams. Those movies call out for those incredible Amblin films, which are just, for me, the bedrock of cinema. It's the stuff I love the most, as a kid, and still do. And I think with it, really, we approached it like an adventure film from a musical point of view. Of course, it's a horror movie, and there's some terrifying things in it. But most of what's in the film is this astonishing sense of adventure and coming of age, and these kids who feel like outsiders, who find strength in each other and then coming together as a group to defeat something terrible.
So let's talk a little bit about Ben Wallfisch. So he was born in England, born to a very, very musical household. His father was Raphael Wallfisch, and he's actually the one that did the cello on my last film, and Ben wrote the theme for that. And Ben's grandmother is Anita Lasker Wallfisch, and she is one of the most resilient, inspiring people I've ever had the chance to hear about and discover through my last film. She was interviewed for that film. And so he comes from this very long legacy of musicians and of composers and stuff like that. So when he decided to go to music school, he decided to study music composition as a whole rather than just film scoring, which really allowed him to study a lot of great classical composers and extract from their styles. And so if you look at the sort of musical elegance that really harkens back to a lot of great romantic composers in the It films, that's really where all that came from. He went to the Royal Northern Music Academy in England, and then he also went to the Guildhall School of Music, which is actually where Harry Gregson Williams went to before he went to go work for Richard Harvey and eventually Hans Zimmer. So Ben Wallfisch went to school, and then after that he worked for Dario Marianelli. As great of a composer that Ben Wallfisch is, he's also an equally great conductor. So a lot of the sessions that Dario Marianelli asked him to conduct for, whether it's Pride and Prejudice or Atonement, there was a lot of cues that were recorded without a click track. And Ben Wallfisch is able to, use streamers and all that kind of stuff. So he was very successful there. And then eventually Hans Zimmer discovered him. And there's this great story where Hans Zimmer reached out to this one guy named Ben Wallfisch, thinking that it was Ben Wallfisch. And it was actually a guy from Texas who was a lawyer named Ben Wallfisch. And finally he got in touch with Ben, and they've had this collaboration ever since. and they worked on films like Blade Runner 2049 and Batman v Superman together, and also Dunkirk. The first big film that I definitely remember Ben Wallfisch scoring was Lights Out, which was directed by David Sandberg, the same guy that directed Annabelle Creation and also Shazam, so they've worked together 3 times now. And eventually he would go on to do, you know, A Cure for Wellness and recently films like Hellboy. And one of the things that's so great about Ben Wallfisch's career is he's weaved in and out of so many different genres. You know, he's got huge adventure scores like Shazam, he's got horror scores like It and Annabelle Creation, he's got big sort of punk rock action scores like Hellboy. And he's got, you know, nature documentaries that he's done, so he's able to go in and out of these different genres so well. But definitely the style that he created on A Cure for Wellness and is carried over to the It films, it is such a unique style. It's almost like a subgenre of horror scoring called like gothic horror. And so it's this style of horror scoring that really has a lot of creepiness and elegance in it, which I absolutely love. So that's really just a little bit about Ben's journey as a composer. So the first thing I want to talk about, just in terms of musical elements, is the string writing. So this really is a string-based score, even though it has, you know, brass elements in there. It's also got elements of flutes, which we'll talk a little bit about in a second. But the strings are really at the forefront of the score, and they just weave in and out so beautifully. You'll notice moments where the strings will just crescendo and rise, and they'll become really loud and puncturing. There's moments where during the action sequences, there's these really, really heavy, you know, digging strings that just sort of dive into the drum rhythms and everything happening there. But then there's also moments where the strings get super, super nimble and quiet and high-end during a lot of the Pennywise sequences. So the strings are a really strong part of the film. One cue that I would look at in regards to this is Blood Oath, which is the last cue, and we'll analyze that in a bit. But the way that he writes for strings is so unique, and I would compare it most to James Newton Howard, just in terms of the way that he voices strings and the way that it really just feels so full and rich. So the next thing is the adventure element. So Ben Wallfisch did say he wanted to create like a classic adventure score like John Williams and stuff like that, but at the same time he wanted to push beyond that, and that is when we get into the pretty intense, wacky sort of sonic manipulation that he uses. So we have scenes like when the creepy lady comes off the wall, or when Pennywise is chasing Ben through the library, and we get these really wacky sounds, and that really stems from manipulating original organic sounds and also a lot of synth work. And the thing that makes this work so well is that Pennywise itself is able to shapeshift and turn into many different things. So if you take an original recording and shapeshift it into different weird sounds, it works pretty well to describe the character. So there are moments where the film is very much a classical, conventional orchestral score, and then there's moments where it gets into a much more dark, sinister, synth sort of undercurrent. And the thing that makes it one of my favorite horror scores is the fact that it really is unique. You know, we have the world that Joseph Bashara created on Insidious and The Conjuring, and that's its own thing. The Ring is its own thing. You know, the dark world of Hannibal is its own thing, and this is really its own world that he's created. So he did a great job just in pushing the boundaries and trying to create a sonic landscape that hasn't really been explored yet. So the next thing is Oranges and Lemons. So Ben Wallfisch exposed this through a Reddit Q&A he did back in the day when it first came out. I think it was September of 2017. But it's the song that was written in the 1600s, 17th century, and it's called Oranges and Lemons, and it talks a bit about child sacrifice. He decided to have a little girl record it, which sounds pretty creepy, opens up the movie, and it really gets you right into the story. And then he also had a larger ensemble of children sing it as well, which he ended up distorting. And he uses the choir throughout the film, you know, for example, in the shape-shifting scene, but also when we first see the Losers Club interact with Pennywise in the house, you know, with the rod going through his head. And I'm sort of just envisioning the visuals right now, and it's just so damn cool how Muschietti directed it and the visuals that he thought of. Super twisted and fun. But oranges and lemons is a really strong undercurrent, and it's not only used in the choir and in the vocals, but it's also used in the strings. So there's moments, for example, when Georgie is first meeting Pennywise in the sewer, before he gets, you know the story, before he gets taken down into the sewers to float, there's these sort of really creepy harmonics that are playing, and it's actually playing the melody of Oranges and Lemons. And that gets us into our next subject, which is the musical textures of Pennywise. And what he does is, when the music isn't loud and upfront during the action scenes, he has the music creep up on you and almost attack, just like Pennywise does. So he uses string harmonics, really light string textures, and as well as he has the cellos and the basses play on the tailpiece, which is this wooden thing at the end of the instrument. And when they play on that tailpiece, it ends up creating this really weird sound, which does really well to describe the character of Pennywise. So the next thing is the use of the flutes. And again, this is why I love the score. It's so contrasty. You know, you have the crazy action music, you know, the 5/4 action music that happens in cues like River Chase and Egg Boy. And then you have these really beautiful adventure cues, like, you know, Beverly, where you have the flutes being played, and then you have Blood Oath. And there's not a lot of woodwinds in the score, not a lot of clarinets, not a lot of bassoons or oboes, but there is quite a bit of flutes to just show that childlike aspect. So that, for me, that really harkens back to the 1980s scores of John Williams and stuff like that. So throughout the score, if you listen, you'll hear a lot of flute work being done. And the last thing I want to mention is the way that Benjamin Wallfisch chooses to score evil in the film. So one thing is, there's absolutely no disassociation or difference between the way that he scores Henry Bowers and Pennywise. It's all evil versus good, light versus dark. So for example, in a cue like River Chase, if you look at that scene and the sort of 5/4 time signature action music that's being played there, and then you look at the scene closely after that, which is the Egg Boy scene, the music is essentially the exact same. So Henry Bowers is essentially portrayed to be just as evil and sadistic and cruel, and he definitely probably is, as Pennywise. They both have their own love of inflicting cruelty and pain on other people. So that's really what the music chooses to focus on and target. So today we're going to talk about the 5 most prominent themes. There are other themes that are sort of hidden beneath the score and are a lot more difficult to sort of point out upon first listen, but we're just going to focus our attention on the 5. So the first one is Every 27 Years. Now this is the theme that opens up the film and the theme that you hear in the ending credits, and it's got almost this like interesting stillness to it. The harmony is sort of hard to get your finger on. You know, it's C, it's E minor, then it goes to C minor, F minor, there's a little bit of C sharp minor, A minor. So it goes in between all these different keys, and it's really, really cool because of that. But it has this otherworldly quality, which really helps to immerse you in Stephen King's world and create the tone of the first movie right off the bat. So that's Derry, Every 27 Years. The next one is the Georgie theme, which is a very intimate, small theme, which is built from strings. It's built from piano, a little bit of harp in there as well. So the next one is Beverly. So this is one of my favorite musical sequences in the film. It's when they're all out swimming and stuff like that. It's just this great breather that the film really needs at that point, because you have all this tension building up, and then all of a sudden there's this scene where these kids are just having fun. You know, it's nothing creepy, it's nothing spooky, and you have this music which comes in, played in D minor, and it's sort of this walk down, D minor, A minor, G minor first inversion, and it's got this beautiful quality to it, which is really about the childhood, the adventure of being a kid, of, you know, making mistakes, of facing your problems, of being together as kids. I mean, it really has that quality to it, and especially when there's relationships beginning to brew between Bill and Bev, and Ben and Bev, and all that stuff, it's a great cue. Now these last 2 themes are part of one musical cue, which is Blood Oath. So at the ending of the film, they've defeated Pennywise, they, you know, come up above the sewers, and they're sitting there together, and they really realize that if Pennywise comes back, I know we're putting our lives in danger, but we're gonna come back here and we're gonna defeat this thing. Because, you know, we defeated it once, we can defeat it again. And there's this code of honor that they've created with each other, you know, with the Blood Oath, and the music really accents that. And it's a great ending to the first film, but in my opinion, even a greater ending for the second film, when we hear Stan's letter being read out, and we see all of them go on their own journeys, and they're beginning, you know, Mike is finally leaving Derry after being there for all of those years. Bev has finally found a peace with Ben. all those things. It's just a really beautiful ending. The only other theme that I have written down here is the Friends theme, and that is essentially at the ending of Blood Oath. It's part of the Blood Oath theme, but at the same time, I think it's different enough and it's used differently throughout to give its own mention. And so that's essentially just E, C sharp, B, and A, and it just repeats that, and then there's chords layered on top. And again, that's really just another theme that describes the unity of these kids and the friendship that they have. But anyways, without further ado, let's head into the suite breakdown. So first and foremost, let's take a look at Every 27 Years, which is a really, really fun cue. It's what opens up the film, and it really has this like dark, mystical elegance to it, and he's going between a lot of really interesting harmonic techniques. And one of the main things he tends to use a lot of is pivot chords, but again, also a lot of chord inversions, a lot of leading tones, which allows him to go from one chord to another chord, even though they're not in the same key. So an example of this is A minor to F minor. They're not really in the same key, and they sound pretty dissonant right off the bat. But the one note that they both have in common is this C. And then, for example, you can use that F to have something in common with a new chord, which might be D flat major. So now at this point you have a chord sequence that sounds a little like this. Sounds a little familiar because that's a lot of the kinds of harmony that he tends to use in the score, which really gives it this very haunting, sort of elegant, beautiful vibe, especially when it's played and written into the strings. So let me just go ahead and play Every 27 Years, and then as I'm playing, I'll narrate the chords. So first of all, we start out in C. So we have C, E minor first inversion, C minor, A flat minor, F minor first inversion, A minor, and this next chord is really interesting. We actually have a D flat minor with the fifth in the bass. So the next thing that we go to is essentially a melodic minor scale. So we have a normal minor scale, and then a melodic minor scale. Which is essentially sort of just making that last part of the scale a major chord. It's got this really cool sound to it. And then at that point we go back to D minor, and then we go to B major. And then to B minor. So he's doing a lot of this kinds of stuff where he's going from, a major chord to a minor chord, and then he's pivoting around and going back to a different key. And really, even though it sounds really complex, like he's, using a lot of different techniques, the one thing that he's using is a lot of chord relationships, and he's using a lot of leading tones and really solid melodies to be able to jump from one to the other. And now we have a A flat minor, major, and then he takes really like a few bars to just rest on A minor before he moves into his new key, which is F major. So all of that was the exact same as the previous key, we're just transposing it to F. Here's where it starts to change. So we have a B flat minor with the fifth in the bass, D minor with the third in the bass, F sharp minor, C sharp minor with the third in the bass, and then A minor. And that's really essentially the piece. And the only thing that we go to after that is a E flat minor, doing the exact same melodic minor thing that we did before. So yeah, so there is quite a bit of stuff happening, and it took me a little while to sort of get used to it because he uses it a lot throughout the score. But in general, it's really important to just see that each of those chords have something in common. It just really depends on what that thing is. So it might be a note, it might be that, you know, one scale leaded into another scale, it might be that the actual melody itself led its way via a leading tone into a new chord, and that's really what brings everything together and creates that really unified, elegant sound that this one piece has. So now that we've looked at that, let's take a look at what's happening orchestrationally here. So we start out with just the solo piano, and then right here on bar 10 is when the first initial strings come in, and that's only the violins. Here's what that sounds like. And then at that point, we bring in some more strings. We have some lower strings and then some small sort of swells that are at the top end of the string section. But he waits until bar 21 when he actually brings in the main melody that we're playing on the piano. He brings that into the string section. So that's when it really gets a lot larger. There's a really interesting orchestration choice that he's actually using right here, which is doubling essentially the low piano into some low string pizzicatos, which if you just play those two together, sounds like this. You could almost not really even feel it, but at the same time, when you put it into a larger texture, you can definitely feel that every single chord change has a bit more impact just because of those low strings, you know, the pizzicato on each of the downbeats. So the string section itself is made up of a few different parts. First and foremost, we have the bass section, which sounds like this. It's these sort of swells. We have our main melody, which is being played in the violins. And then of course, since we have the bass and we have our upper melody, we have the rest of the strings filling in the rest of the harmony. And then we have a cello voice, which is just sort of sitting in the middle of that texture, creating some movement. And then last but not least, we have sort of more top end strings, which just give it a little bit more breath and a little bit more air and help the texture breathe a little bit more. But here is all those things all together. And you can see, even though we're jumping around to a lot of really interesting different kinds of things harmonically, when you look at all of the voice leading, it seems to all be sort of weaving in and out of each other, and he's using a lot of these leading tones. As you can see right here, you can see he's using leading tones right here, and that's one of the ways that it helps to create a unified, sort of cohesive texture. So this is a very sort of common texture that we use a lot throughout the movie, which is essentially a string orchestra, and then we might have a piano sort of layered on top. And that really is the sort of essence of what like Georgie's theme is, for example. And it really just gives this nice, simple string texture, really, really great for thematic material and just creating a nice underscore. And that's one of the major textures that we tend to hear a lot throughout the movie. Alrighty, so now we are on Paper Boat. So harmonically speaking, it's relatively simple. We have C minor, and then we go to F major. It's actually F major with the 5th in the bass, and then A flat major with the 3rd in the bass. And then E flat major, G minor, And again, all he's really doing there, I know it sounds like super, super cool and complex, but it's actually really, really simple. All he's doing is he's going G minor, D minor, and then he's using this F as a pivot chord to get into this D flat major. And then he has that sitting as a first inversion. So again, just to reiterate those chords, we're sticking with the C and the bass all the way until we get to the E flat major. And notice how the melody itself actually prepares us for that chord change when we go from D minor to that D flat major first inversion. The literal scale leads us into that chord. So that just goes to show us when we're wanting to get from one point to another, even though it might have this sort of conflict, or it might not exactly be, we can use scales and we can use specific kinds of voicings and chord inversions to be able to create that transition more smoothly. And then F minor, and then sus. So we start out with the strings actually playing the ostinato part here. And initially, the actual main melody is only being played in the flutes, but then once we get into the E flat major section, we bring in the string orchestra. Especially when you bring in the string texture on bar 42. It really just has this sense of childhood and exploration. So again, we start out, we have our string ostinato part, and that is played alongside our violins. Melody. And then we bring in our bass and our main strings for the E flat major chord to G minor, D minor to the D flat major. And as you can see, the melody is being doubled in the strings with the flutes. Which has this really, really cool sound when you double the flutes with the strings. It has this like very high-end, airy, breathy kind of sound. And obviously we have two major components down here which are also adding to that texture. We have the harp, which is really doubling what the strings are doing and just creating a bit more of that motion, adding to the texture. Doubled with the strings. And then the choir on its own, you can see it works especially well with the string section, just helping to warm that up a bit. And it actually has a bit of like a Danny Elfman sound in a way. And then in regards to the voicing, if you look at the voicing here, everything is really spread out and sort of nicely arranged across the dimensions of the orchestra. As much as you can spread out your strings and really give them room to breathe each individual section and work off of each other, that's what creates that beautiful sort of silky string sound that we see a lot in Ben's music, but also in James Newton Howard's and a lot of other composers that we love a lot. So There is a little bit about Paper Boat. Harmonically, again, very simple. Now we're going into Georgie Meets Pennywise, which is where things start to get a little bit sinister. So the next cue, Georgie Meets Pennywise, I think is a slice of musical genius, and it's because of the actual storytelling that the music is doing. So Pennywise as a character, as it was created in the Stephen King novel and how he is played in the movie by Bill Skarsgård, he is a brilliant deceiver. He likes to adapt these kids' fears, like what they're scared of, and use it against them, use it to capture them and kill them. So in this case, the music is almost acting as Pennywise. She's trying to create this sort of mystical vibe, which really is just dark and sinister, and it's just showing the way that Pennywise likes to lie and get into people's heads, and he's completely unpredictable. So he could be anywhere, he could be sneaking up on you at any moment, he could be anything, and that's really what this music is so dang good at capturing. And the main instrument that's being used right here is the celeste, which is this sort of bell instrument. And you might recognize it a lot from but again, he's sort of using it as like if you're a kid running around outside and like you see a really pretty bird and it's like, wow, I mean, it's like, obviously, Pennywise is not that pretty bird. He's a bird that's gonna come down and pick you up and drop you from 500 feet and kill you. But the music is creating that lie and that deception that Georgie is about to discover in this character. And it really adds just a whole other dimension to the creepiness of Pennywise. Now notice the harmonics when they come in here. And this is one of the first musical elements in this piece that really just has this off-putting. It's almost like an alarm, like get the heck away from this creepy clown in the sewer. Like it's telling you as an audience. And all the strings in this section are just high-end violins and violas. So from bars 63 through 81, we're using a melodic figure from every 27 years. See which one you could guess. It's the melodic minor section. And he's really just taking that and he's simplifying it and he's making it a lot more drawn out. And so let's take a look at how that differentiates from this cue and then the cue Derry, from Georgie Meets Pennywise and then Derry. So for Georgie Meets Pennywise, we have A minor, and then F major, first inversion, and then we go down to the root. And then we have D flat major. So it has a darker end, but with Derry, it's a lot brighter. So it's got a bit more full and rich of a sound, and that's especially due to the woodwind flutters that we bring in during this section, which just have a really nice sound. All together. But between bars 63 and 72, the orchestration is really minimal. So all that we have is the harp, which is creating our movement and sort of our motor. We have our main melody, you know. And then our harmonic sort of backbone. And then down beneath, we have this sort of low guttural bass, which is really just a very visceral sound. By the time we get to bar 72, we bring in a lot more elements and it becomes a lot bigger. That especially has to do with the brass that we bring in and then the woodwind flutters that we bring in. So with the brass, you can definitely feel just the weight of that. And then our strings, which are playing in octaves. And octaves are just a great way if you really have a melody that you want to accentuate and create a very powerful tone. Octaves are the way to go. Especially when you layer it with a harmony. It just has this powerful tone. And what I do a lot of is I layer in Metropolis Arc 2, which is actually a library meant for really quiet strings. And I layer that in there just because it has like a very dry sound. And when you combine it with things that are a lot more silky, it creates a lot more attention in the mix. It's more of a mock-up trick and like a production trick than it is like a compositional kind of thing. But I always like, if I can, like blending in just some really dry elements because it helps to create like focus on specific instruments or specific sections in the orchestra. And you can see as soon as we add in the brass, you can feel it. Like it's not even a sound, it's like a feel. It just absolutely, it punches you. And certainly the woodwind flutters have a lot of impact as well as the booms, which happen on a lot of the big chord changes. It's also important to recognize the harp, which is playing these 16th notes, which is working really well in contrast with the section as a whole because it just keeps this momentum going. Like if you take out the harp, there's nothing wrong with it. But as soon as we bring the harp back in, you can sort of tell because it just has a bit more flow to it. So this next section, bars 81 through 89, I absolutely love because it has like a very romantic, you know, and I'll just play it for you. It specifically has to do with going from that major to the minor 7. And I love this chord on bar 84 because it is like a normal F minor chord, but then it has that up top, which creates this really nice, beautiful dissonance there. And all that is G major to F minor with the minor 7th. So. And then you've got that note right there. And there we have an augmented chord. And then we dial it down, and then we get into Beverly. So Beverly is a cue that I absolutely love, and it's a really, really simple cue in regards to the harmony. We start out in D minor, and then we go to F major, second inversion, G minor, first inversion, A minor, first inversion. And then we have a F major with the 3rd in the bass. And then that is a B flat major, first inversion. And then we go to F major. Short string swells right here. Flute. And at this moment, this is also one of the instances where he'll bring in synth sort of elements. So we have the synth pad come in. Higher strings. So this next cue, Haircut, is a pretty ambient cue until we get to bar 122, and this cue is in D minor, which eventually leads us into Georgie's theme, which is also in D minor. E, and then G minor. This section is really pretty because it almost has like a Interstellar kind of vibe. Now that's a progression he uses a lot, but this specific cue, it only does the B flat, A minor, and then it lands on D minor, which leads us into Georgie's theme. And then it has the harp, and the figure of the harp is Alrighty, so now for Georgie's theme. So it's essentially just like a walk down pattern. So we start out with D minor. And then A minor. And then B flat. And then G minor. And it repeats that over and over again, and the strings sort of swell in and out. Using these wave patches all together. So you can see in general, the textures that we have on Georgie's theme and also Haircut are very, very similar. We have the harp creating the movement, we have a string orchestra, and then we have a piano, which is really up there playing the melody and some of the harmonies. So it's a really, really simple texture, but it's really, really well utilized throughout the series of films for sure. So the harmony right here between bars 137 and 151 or 155 is relatively simple. We start out on A minor and we just build our way up. And then E flat major. And then G minor. And then we have a crescendo, and that leads us into the B minor section. And I love that when you have a huge major chord, and then up top you have the sixth, which really just creates a huge amount of tension right there, especially when you add in the full orchestral texture. But over here, the strings are really, really light. So we just have a sort of string grid playing beneath, and then we have the cellos playing that main melody there. And then we just have a string patch creating some movement in the harmony, and that's literally all that's playing during this section. And then we bring in our lower strings. Then our crescendo, horns. And the reason why on bars, I believe it's 152, the reason why I go back to the Every 27 Years theme is because I needed a modulation tool to get into Blood Oath. So I figured just in terms of arrangement, I would cut back to Every 27 Years, and that can lead us into the final cue, final two cues of the film. Alrighty, so Blood Oath, which is my personal favorite cue of the film, and I know a lot of people who love this soundtrack, this is their favorite cue. So let's talk about the type of stuff that's going on right here. So first of all, we start out in the key of G major. So we have a G major chord, and then a F sharp minor chord with a third in the bass, E minor, 7, and then a F sharp sus. And I love that it doesn't resolve, by the way. It just keeps on that sus. And then at that point, that's when we go into the So the strings during that section are pretty huge, but when the strings initially come in, it's really, really light. So it's just the violins, violas. We open the cue. We bring in some high-end strings right here. And that's when we begin with our sort of whiter chords here. And one thing that really helps to enrich this section is just a simple little synth pad, which sits under all of this. Sounds like that. And it just creates this sort of fluid underbelly that this cue has. So then once we get into our huge section here, that's when things really pick up in regards to voicing and everything like that. Alrighty, so in terms of harmony, we start off, let me just grab this. We start off with a E minor, and then a D with a third in the bass, but then we have that suspended with the fourth. C major with the 7, and then we have an A sus4. And then we just repeat. Really what gives this section a lot of power is the voicing and the strings, which really just have this big, huge weight to them. So you can see I've done a lot of layering just in the production to get that kind of sound. We also have a sub bass sitting beneath the mix and these 2 synth pads, which are working with the more organic elements. And then we also have a cello patch, which is just creating a bit of movement in the texture. And then we also have the piano doing this. So all that's really doing is and then for the next section, we modulate to the key of A, where we have this arpeggio starting on A, C sharp, B, and then A. Or E, C sharp, B, and A. A. So let's take a look at that segment right here. Pads come in. And then the flutes. So you can tell during this last segment, the Friends theme, or the second part of Blood Oath, there's quite a bit of synth pads underneath there. As well as the actual arpeggio. So the cue Kiss goes back to our central key of C major that the film starts out with. And so let's just give that a listen. We start out with C and then E minor. And this is really like the hopeful ending that I think this film is so well appreciated and known for. I mean, we all know horror films that end like with somebody dying or a cliffhanger. But this film ends almost like if you didn't make an It Chapter 2, it's almost the ending of the story, which is such a beautiful thing. It's like a fairy tale. And it ends in that very fairy tale kind of way. You know, Bill and Bev kissing and that kind of thing. And the music really accents that really, really well. We have C major, E minor, And the choir comes in right over there on bar 195. So again, all that is that C major. And then G minor. And then we end on our C. And that's of course when it says It Chapter 2, or the end of It Chapter Part 1, or I forget what the exact ending is, but it essentially says there's gonna be another movie coming pretty soon, so. But anyways, there's just a little look into the suite of It. As you can tell, there's a lot of great themes, a lot of great writing on behalf of Ben, just really great voicing and chords, and definitely textures as well that really just help to enrich the narrative and continue to create that relationship between you and the characters on screen. It just is a really, really tight score that fits into the worlds that Andy Muschietti and Stephen King created so, so well. Alrighty, so there is behind the score It. Thank you guys so much for taking this little trip to Derry, Maine with me, where we spent some time with Pennywise and the Losers Club. This is a fantastic film with so much humor and so much heart and a lot of great scares. So if you guys get the chance, take some time with the family this Halloween and just watch the film, enjoy both films. They both have a lot to offer and great direction, great music. So I hope you guys have learned something, and thanks again for the comments and the support and the kindness that you guys have for the channel. I would not do it without you, and hope to see you guys very soon. Just to be sure, it will not take 27 years for the next video, but time to float.